Yes, I am the Director of Network Development at Thriving Together, North Central Washington. And I want to welcome everyone to the Regional Wellbeing Survey kickoff. Before we get started, I will ask that we all just enter our name, our organization, and just a quick check-in of where our partners are at regionally. So perhaps the county or city or town that you're joining us from. And while everybody is doing that, I will go ahead and let John, our executive director, give a few words before I jump into sharing my screen with the our PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, again, I just want to thank everyone for joining today. We are officially starting next month, which is tomorrow, launching our well-being survey. And just first off, just a big shout out to a few groups that have been actively involved in this. We've had a stewardship council that has been looking at our network as a whole and how we are really building a network focused on the vital conditions, and they've been involved in a piece of this. So I want to give them a huge shout out. I'm not going to name names of who's on the call in case I miss anyone. Our shared measurement task force, and Veronica has been leading the stewardship council. Our shared measurement task force, which has been led by Sarah Bates, has really been the ones who dove into and really crafted and finalized the survey. So I just really want to give a shout out to all of them who have spent time making sure that we have the right questions and the right depth of questions that we were really looking for. And they've really put that time and effort in crafting and putting some of the process together, as well as our board who really endorsed our vision and goals of the vital conditions. So it's really, the great thing about this is even though we're really just launching this more broadly out to the community, we've had a lot of you on this call already actively involved in these discussions, and the energy that you guys have shared has been amazing. And, a shout out to community initiatives, Monty and Stacy, who's been with us for really about 2 or 3 years. We're on this adventure of really leaning into the vital conditions. They're national consultants. Sometimes I feel like they're staff members just as much as consultants, and part of the Thriving Together family. So it's just been great to have them in our community and part of this process. I know you guys will meet Becky Payne, and I see her on the screen from the Ripple Foundation as well, who has been one of the key drivers of conditions in this region. Can you guys hear me? Okay, sorry, my camera magically turned off. And really, I just want to emphasize, as Thriving Together, we are really focused on how we improve the health and well-being of all residents in our community. And we are really focused on doing it in a community-driven, community-engaged way. And I think that's one of the exciting things about this well-being survey is that we are actually going out to the community to ask them where they feel they are in regards to suffering, struggling, and thriving, and starting to gain their input on some of those key indicators around what can be changed. I think there's a lot of times out there when we all get stuck in this loop of looking at healthcare data, health data, and making the assumptions for our communities on if they're struggling, suffering, or thriving, instead of really engaging them directly in this process. And this is just a great first, and I want to say this, first step into community engagement in this discussion, really broadly getting out there to see where some of our members really feel that they are across our demographics, across our geographic regions. And then when we complete the survey and gather this information, using that information to really as a first step to then start looking at those communities that are struggling and suffering, really diving more deep into those conversations around what are those key things that are occurring in those communities that they're struggling about, and what can we do as a whole North Central network to support our key members in our community who are struggling and suffering, to lift them up so that we can really have a place where everyone is thriving. And that energy and the fact that I know we had around 50 individuals register, and we've talked to, in reality, our team has talked to probably 100+ people across our community demonstrates that we're all really getting behind this movement. And it's just really exciting to see that going and to see this getting launched and getting started. So I'm excited to kick off today. I'm excited for the team and everyone to hear everything going on, and really over the next few months to see how we get out there in community to collect this information, and then over the next year, how we use this information to transform change. So thank you all for joining. Those are my opening remarks. I'll turn it back over to Veronica.
Thank you, John. I am going to intent and share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see my slideshow in presenter view?
Switch to the other view. Yeah.
Oh, where am I? There you go. All right. Well, thank you, John, for that quick welcome. Just to do a quick recap of today's time together, as John mentioned, we want to continue this momentum around thriving together, and we'll have an opportunity to hear from national partners, Becky Payne, President and CEO at the Ripple Foundation, to dive a little bit deeper into growing vital conditions, measuring well-being, and then we will also hear from Monty at Community Initiatives. And Mariah and I will wrap things up with talking about the actual survey and the community dialogue efforts that we've been working on alongside the Stewardship Council and the Shared Measurement Task Force across the region. So that is what our time will look like this morning. And I'll get started with a quick introduction of my role at Thriving Together. So as I mentioned, I joined the organization last summer as their Director of Network Development, and I've had the honor to already work with some of you in some capacity. And I just want to recognize that the work behind this regional network has truly been happening for quite some time now. And for the past 9 months, I've been able to work with a group of regional partners who have came together as a stewardship council, and they've been brainstorming and working on ways to really lift up our local efforts at that regional level across the region, and how to enhance and improve our vital conditions that are needed in order for all of us to thrive in our communities. And so in the past 9 months, we were able to finalize a partner agreement that really highlights the beliefs, the impacts, and the commitments that we are leaning into as a regional network. And the goal with this network, it's still in its infancy, but the goal with this network is to really come together and just lean on each other as partners to identify, what it is that we all need to live up to this measurable goal of all people and places thriving, no exceptions. There's also a webpage that we launched when we finalized the partner agreement, and that is up on our website already. So I encourage you folks to join our network and be a part of this movement and learn, come together to learn more about what it takes to improve those vital conditions across the region. I'm going to do a quick I'm going to stop sharing my screen here just because there was a quick change to the agenda, but I will let Monty take it away from here to introduce Becky Payne, and perhaps she will be sharing her screen.
Great. Well, thank you, Veronica, for your leadership and John's leadership, and for kicking us off. And, as John suggested, Stacy and I from the CI team have, really enjoyed and feel privileged to be kind of working and learning alongside this network. And it's amazing to see what's starting to emerge. And as John and Veronica, I think, have suggested, this is not just kicking off a survey, it's kicking off a way of seeing our world and our lives together and our interdependence, and really to be intentional about how measurement and we'll talk a little bit about dialogue too, as one way of really starting to catalyze change for collective action and collective change. So congratulate you all on kind of taking this first step forward among some other steps to kind of lay the groundwork for this. And, I have the honor of introducing a longtime colleague and friend in Becky Payne, and she is now the president and CEO of the Ripple Foundation, which, when you all have more time, you can peruse the Ripple Foundation, which has this fascinating history of being really social innovators for the last several decades in this country. And not surprisingly, when they had a chance to hire a new CEO and president, they picked Becky Payne, and she has been an innovator at the Centers for Disease Control for a long time, including some of their largest initiatives in the country. And I had a chance to witness firsthand how Becky has led and navigated across some really challenging and interesting efforts. And also, not surprisingly, when there was an opportunity for the CDC, she was the point person from the CDC for the equitable long-term and recovery work for COVID, and led that effort, which was organized all of government approach around the vital conditions. So Becky's going to share a little bit around how this way of thinking is starting to kind of take shape around the country, that I think will offer some context for kind of the significance of what you all are doing here in Washington. So welcome, Becky.
Thank you, Monty. And if the technology gods smile favorably on us, hopefully you will start seeing my screen. And I will say I've had a little bit of a jittery internet connection this week, and hopefully that holds off as well. Are you seeing a slide? Okay, wonderful. John, Maria, Veronica, all of you, thank you so much for inviting me in. I don't take it for granted that it is a great privilege to be joining you in your sacred space of your community. So thank you for inviting our voice to share a little bit about what we see. I also want to just honor that part of what I want you to hear at the conclusion of this is that you are not alone and you are on a leading edge. And sometimes, having worked at the national level for far too long, I find that people doing the really important work, the frontline work, especially in their own community, fail to see and recognize the leadership that you really represent and the leadership that you are exerting, and how much what you are doing is worth lifting up at a national level, and putting it in context of what you are doing as being true leadership and innovation, but anchored in the reality of your local context. And I think that's the beauty of the frameworks you've chosen to lean into and what we're going to talk about a little bit. So I am going to go pretty quickly. I will share the slides. You will have access to them. I also know for some of you, this is going to be sort of a refresher as we enter. I have one senior in high school who's entering exams, so this is your refresher course. For others of you, this is maybe brand new, and have no fear, you're in good hands with your team at Thriving Together, and Monty and Stacy. They will help you absorb and go through and really sit with the frameworks. But the Ripple Foundation is a national operating foundation where we work and join with lots of others to help realize the same North Star goal that you hold of all people and places thriving together with no exceptions. And this is a very special North Star for all of us because it is a unifying aspiration and a hopeful statement of what we all share in common and what we want in the world, but it is also measurable, and it has an underpinning in social science constructs. It is well-founded. It has also been measured by entities, which I'll share a little bit more, over many decades. And so it is this unique, elegant, simple measurement tool that allows people to self-report, so honoring their perspective and their view of their life, if they're thriving, struggling, or suffering. And you can put it in context and benchmark against others, either in the region, against others nationally, and others who are using this same construct. So we love this because it does a lot of things at once, something we refer to as multi-solving, and it's very self-evident what we're talking about. These phrases are not overly academic. They mean something to people in their day-to-day life. So I talked about measurement as that's something you're getting ready to kick off. The other reason this has been so powerful for us is to really put thriving, struggling, and suffering in context. One, it is highly sensitive to things happening. So you will be able to see changes and shifts in this measurement pretty immediately, depending on what is going on in your, so this happens to be national contexts of things that we've all experienced, and you can see the fluctuations, sometimes very large, sometimes more nuanced. But what I also want to call your attention to is that we've had this ceiling effect here, where we've never gone above 60% as a country of people saying that they are thriving. Now, to carry the school analogy forward, none of us would qualify that as success. And it does call into question who's being left out. Not surprisingly, we see differences by race, ethnicity, and the uptick in recent years, which reflects what we've all lived through, is that we've seen a stark uptick in those who are not just struggling, but suffering, hitting an all-time high in recent time. So this construct, both I want to just level set and share with you how we use it, how we talk to others, so that you can use your own data to engage community members and help them do sense making with you when they see their data reflected. And also to say, we should really reject that 60% is sufficient and we should be satisfied with that. The status quo is not getting us where we need to be. I see a partner who will recognize this data also on this call. I also want to share with you that you're not alone in using this kind of measurement to understand what's happening locally. Theta Care, which is health system in Fox Cities, and Monty and Stacy worked extensively with them, use this for their community health needs assessment and look at the richness of what they were able to pull out of their data with the way that they structured that measurement process. You can really start to break down and understand and see the stark differences in ways in which you choose to slice your data. That sets up conversations and a deeper understanding of what people are experiencing in your community. So why, when data is great, but when you start to think about, well, why, what is this telling us? This notion that well-being really relies on systems that, as you all know, this is not new, were built in a way that sets us up to have differentiation. Not everyone can thrive. We hold a firm belief that interdependence that Monty alluded to, this notion that people coming together, people, organizations, our broader environment are all connected. And if enough of us come together, we can change those systems. So I often say, and I'm not the first to say it, systems were designed by people. We have it within our power and our control to redesign those systems. But it doesn't happen by accident. You don't just say, oh, we need to redesign the system and let's keep tweaking around the margins, doing what we've always been doing with programmatic funding, near-term solutions, and expect a different outcome. No, we have to fundamentally think and act differently. That doesn't happen by chance. It is groups coming together in community, like the group that you've pulled together here in Coalition, and really creating the space to breathe into shifting mindsets, setting yourselves up to understand the experience in your community fundamentally differently. Only then do you start to get to a different outcome. So let's talk a moment about interdependence. There's deep literature and science around interdependence, but just for a moment, anchor yourself in the recognition that it's a state of being dependent on one another. And I think if we had time, I could go around the Hollywood squares and ask each of you to think about who is somebody that you depend on. Who do you need in your life day to day, week to week to get through and live the life that you are living? We all have that person. If you think about extended circles in your community, we can think about the institutions, the organizations that we depend on, or else life would be fundamentally different. So it's this idea that our interactions as human beings, our interactions in the broader context, yes, our environment, our physical environment, but also the institutions that make up our community are a functioning ecosystem. And the modifications in any one of those have an impact, whether we plan for it or not, on all of the other pieces of that ecosystem that they touch. So we also, I think you all have talked about stewardship. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I just want to give you the frame of this language and the notion that there are people who we refer to as stewards. It's a very old tradition in stewardship, but we have chosen to reflect the kinds of capacities, the skill sets, the characteristics of how you go about creating the kind of change that you're trying to create as a set of stewardship capacities. And we think of stewards as both people and organizations in that community who take a very particular approach and understanding of the role that you play, that you really understand that interdependence and strive to come together with other people to create those conditions, those vital conditions that we all need to thrive together. And you take a posture from an equity lens that the best way to go above 60% of people thriving is to not start with those people who are already thriving or almost thriving and just make their life a little better, but you really turn your orientation to the folks who are reporting that they are struggling and suffering, designing for them, understanding deeply what values and assets and innovation they bring, what their experience has been, and designing solutions anchored in that is how stewards approach the world that keeps us anchored in equity and trying to narrow those disparities. Again, just to put a finer point on this, I will contrast maybe how some of you have historically either approached or been frustrated by having to approach your work based on funding lines, based on election cycles, based on leadership. There are any host of reasons, and none of which I want to be sure that you don't hear judgment in my portrayal of that there are just realities in history and traditionally how we have been set up, either through funding or requirements or the will to do things differently, that we would characterize as transactional versus transformational. And when I hear groups saying, we really want a thriving future for all, be very clear that you are not talking about business as usual. That is a transformational aspiration that requires that mindset shift I mentioned. But historically, we've designed interventions that may be short-term programs or projects in response to a grant cycle, in response to somebody's new favorite initiative. And of course, we all put our best thought about the outcomes. We're trying to make sure that we have impacts on health and well-being and equity, but because they're so hooked to a near-term or a short-term or a small-scale, narrowly defined intervention, even if you have an impact on health and well-being and equity, they're often weak or very short in duration. They don't last and extend beyond the life cycle of that program. A transformational approach really starts with, again, shifting mindsets and actions. And you can see the practices that requires of you, connecting across differences, creating expansive opportunities for lots of input, and honestly entering a space where you are learning and adapting together and not getting fixed on what you think you're going to do, and tomorrow when you learn something new, that you're not so rigidly held to that design that you can't create ways of calling the question and adjusting together. I talked about shared stewardship. I'm not going to go into great detail there, but there are a set of practices that are anchored in equity and that express those the approach to designing different solutions that are more likely to be stronger in impact and lasting in duration. They often take a longer time horizon. So again, not a 2 to 3 year time horizon, but investing in things today that can get you out a decade, or we often even talk about a generational shift, that are truly about tackling that redesign of that system. If I go back to the beginning, systems designed for people, people can redesign systems. But if you don't start out realizing that the task at hand is a system redesign, if you start off thinking we're designing an intervention, then you're going to end up in that top transactional row. So let me talk about some of the frameworks that help you with that can be measured. So you can get to transformational approaches, but you can also measure your progress along the way. And I'm going to just name perhaps the question that you're holding about social determinants of health, because we've heard this question often. Are we pitting one framework against another? Is there something wrong with social determinants of health? Why are we talking about vital conditions? And it's a resounding no. The vital conditions and the well-being portfolio that I'm describing here grew out of a genuine frustration, but also desire on the part of hundreds of national and local partners who were simply frustrated, stating the obvious, that we have failed in a couple of decades of talking about social determinants of health to make the kind of progress that we need, that our communities deserve, that should be expected with the amount of investment we've put into it. So what's wrong? Like, how can we get better at this? What could we adjust? Again, people coming together to not hold rigidly to an idea, but to think fundamentally, how do we think differently about this and design our way out of this system? And they, identified the many values and benefits of social determinants of health and the aspiration, and said, where are we coming up against roadblocks? How could we talk about this differently? So the well-being portfolio, vital conditions, were an answer to saying, how do we get practical and unifying in our action? There is an article you can read about that kind of lays that out a little bit more about how the vital conditions helps us take action and make progress on social determinants of health. What I want to focus you on now is to also call out another sort of mental model that we find people struggle with initially in their first introduction to vital conditions. And that is putting it in context with something we call urgent services. So the urgent services on the right hand of this wheel are valid, worthwhile, very necessary things that people who are experiencing adversity, so think about struggling and suffering, think about a climate crisis, think about a pandemic, think about any kind of interjected crisis moment, or for some of too many in our communities, a perpetual state of being because the systems are not serving them. When you're under adversity, you may need them to regain or restore well-being. And again, I'll underscore, for some, it's not about regaining or restoring. They perhaps have not yet ever had access to well-being in certain ways. So these things, I will assert and hope you agree with me, these are all very necessary things we need in our communities, especially when people are struggling and suffering. But I would defy anybody to suggest that the presence of these alone can produce well-being. So when you start to think about what would actually produce well-being, you get to the vital conditions on the other side of the portfolio. And those are the things that we all need regularly to reach our full potential. And they start to talk about the community conditions that need to exist, not the suite of services that need to be delivered. There's a very important distinction there. I'm going to get to the measurement piece, and then we're almost done because I know we want to have discussion and have questions. The vital conditions are really special for me personally because I have seen the power to bring people together. I was not in the room of those 100 partners when the framework was designed, so I don't have that sense of ownership. I am here as a user, as a super believer in the power of this framework to bring people together and to be really clear about what we are talking about counts as a vital condition, what is sufficient, so that it gets you out of a checking the box mode and having deep conversations about the things we value together that need to be present for everyone. The other thing that is really special about this framework is the design of it is very intentional. So there are 7 vital conditions. You can read about them in more detail, but at the heart of it, at the center, is belonging and civic muscle. So when you talk about anchoring in equity, anchoring in community, belonging and civic muscle is one of the 7 vital conditions, but it is also very important as the anchor in equity, because we have studies and systemic models that show if you invest in belonging and civic muscle alone, even that investment has an outsized impact on the equity of all of the other things you're designing and doing in your community. We've all seen the news about, despair and issues of not feeling connected and mental health crisis in the country, and all roads point to needing to build belonging. And that's good to say, but how do you do that? Well, the vital condition spells that out a little bit in terms of what a sense of belonging looks like, the avenues and the outlets that need to be present in a community for that, in terms of social support, in terms of thinking that there are people and institutions that value you, that will value your voice. It is also a special capacity because in those organizations and institutions, many of which you all represent, it is the space where you all build your capacity to hold the space that allows community voice to truly and genuinely be valued and lifted up in your design of the rest of the vital conditions. One more word about measurement. And again, you'll receive these slides and the links to all of these graphics. This half of this slide, when you're thinking about measurement, and I know we have our colleagues from IP3 here as well, is really important because that's where you start to understand the specificity of the attributes that need to be present. So it's both a design feature as you think about how you want to design the conditions, how you want to assess the gaps that exist in your community, not what a national framework says, but where you want to get really specific about what exists in your community and what you need to build in, and then how you want to measure progress. So you can get baseline, you can get measurement over time, because this starts to articulate it's not just what anybody would think of as a thriving natural world. We're specifically talking about clean air, clean water, clean soil, healthy ecosystems. So you can see that in each of those. And the last thing I'll say again, just to go back to where I started and put your work in context, this slide, we struggle with this slide, to be totally honest, because it could be very messy and have even more places called out on this. And if you put the national partners who are aligned around thriving together around the vital conditions, it is much more than what this slide represents. But I offer this so that you see, again, you are not alone. You have great company in communities that are widely varied, some urban, some rural, some with big indigenous populations, some with very different climates that are all aligning and coalescing around thriving together and the vital conditions. And I'll just say I was recently, and I'm realizing they aren't even on here for some reason. I was just in Delaware last week at a statewide health equity summit where they have pulled together coalitions across the entire state. Now, admittedly, Delaware is a small state. It's a little easier to do that. And they are also having conversations. Their state health improvement plan is now being organized around vital conditions. They are setting up measurement structures. They are also early adopters of recognizing that with the federal plan that Monty alluded to, giving signals about how federal resources need to flow out to states and communities, how federal agencies, both sitting, at headquarters, but also those that are embedded in your communities, which there are many, how the posture that they need to take. And there's a call in that plan for federal agencies to adopt the vital conditions framework for their strategic planning, to allow flexibilities, to really support financially, deep community and meaningful community engagement around these issues. So I share that with you to say, in full disclosure, government is a big bureaucracy. It takes time. Every member of the federal workforce may not be fully aware of that, but you all sitting at a local level, creating the demand, asking for those flexibilities, asking that resources flow that way is an important part of all of us in this broader movement, which you are a part of, kind of that grass tops and grassroots bubbling up of bringing those expectations together. I'll stop sharing and open it up for questions. If there are any points, Monty, John, anybody that you want me to lean into a little more.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Becky. Yeah, we have a few minutes. So, comments, questions, you can put in the chat, and, also just feel free to come off mute if you have something that's kind of top of mind. I saw a lot of heads kind of shaking as you were talking, Becky.
I'm just trying to scan the chat and see if I missed anything. Aaron, thank you for answering that question.
As we're seeing if there's folks that want to make a comment, I'm going to just throw one in the meantime. Just a little bit of, I'll kind of channel the skeptic here, Becky, you know, that, okay, here's another framework. I mean, you've alluded to how this is a little different than the social determinants of health, but, you know, is there something, what's especially magical? Is this just kind of the flavor of the day? You know, is this really going to have staying power? You know, are we expecting everybody to orient? How is this not just another framework?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thank you for that, Monty. So at the end of the day, it is another framework, right? I mean, it is another framework. It is a framework that was born out of experience in frustration and not making the kind of progress we need to see. So it's deeply informed by lots of constituency. That's one. Two is, like any framework, it is only as good as your organizing chops. I would say your stewardship capacities. But we don't make any claims to how rigidly you hold the framework per se. We've seen some tribal communities create different versions of this that reflect their heritage, their art, their culture. It is only as good as what you make of it. So if you look to the framework to say, we're going to implement vital conditions, there, it's done. First of all, you're in about a month going to look at each other and say, well, what does that mean? But second of all, it is going to be that's another transactional design. The framework itself is a tool to invite and set up deep dialogue and conversation and understanding within your community about the current status and where you want to go. And it gives you a framework to say, there's a lot of room to acknowledge all of the ways in which people need to experience their environment in order to be set up to thrive. But it doesn't leave room for just anything that we understand would not contribute to thriving. And I think that's an important tool for you to have. So I think of frameworks as a way to help with that mindset shift. But that mindset shift only comes when you all, as the stewards setting those conversations, remain open to whatever comes up in the community, to having skill in fostering the naming and the healing of past harms, because you're talking about systems, and the ability to move the conversation when it's time from harm to healing. And the framework helps you do both, because you can both see what's missing currently and have a healthy discussion about why and how. And it anchors you in a shared sense of the values that you have that are most important for where you want to go, and talk around how that can happen. So that's my like Becky's view of what it is. On the staying power question, none of us could have predicted several years ago what the staying power would be. There is a version of this where it comes and goes, and we'd be talking about something else. What I can say is, if you study social movements, and those of us who do have studied in particular the uptake of vital conditions of thriving together, you all are a perfect example of that. And the ways in which groups are making it their own, that give us every reason to believe that this does have staying power, because it is unifying. It's unifying at a national level, and you'll find yourself in work that others are doing, which is very important. But it is also unifying and tailored at a local level, which is also important. Social movements are living organisms. They can't be controlled by any one entity. They are often, by definition, a rising up. This framework allows that, has the elegant space to be both unifying and the space to make it your own, which makes it very powerful.
Yeah.
We've got multiple scales: national, regional, hyper-local, where we see traction and energy and momentum using this framework.
Great, thanks. I see 3 hands, so let's see if we can get in three brief ones. And this term movement, which John was also using, I appreciate you kind of layering on that, Becky. So Jennifer, what's up for you?
Well, I don't know if it's a question, it's just a comment. My observation is the power of the circle, you know, that there's this and that it's not a linear thing where you check boxes and say, hey, do we have this? Yes, yes, and yes, we must be good to go. And so I think what the power of this model really allows for, like Becky, you just talked about, it allows for that flexibility for every community to really do what meets their needs and what they see as thriving. And so it's exciting. So that's just my comment.
It's
Thank
great.
you.
And I'll
Yeah.
just add to that, the power of it, and where I witnessed this at the federal level, where we had 45 agencies. So that's well beyond health and social services. It erases silos and it erases organizational identity. So no one agency or organization can have a claim. You start to see the interdependence of everybody's mission.
Awesome. Jesus.
Thank you. Great presentation. Every time I see it, I get excited about what the possibilities. Implied in this comprehensive framework is that you create a big enough tent for as many people, as many sectors, as many entities to engage. That can also create a sense of boiling the ocean. Can you speak to that, and how do you manage those two things? Wanting to have a big enough tent for everyone to participate and contribute, at the same time managing the process so that it doesn't feel so overwhelming.
Yeah, and it's great to see you again, Jesus. And it's a great question. I can say we get that question from time to time. Wouldn't be the first time I've been accused of trying to do something like boil the ocean. But I will say this is where the skill in being able to hold space to hear perspective and then align around shared values becomes really important. One of the approaches we often encourage is to talk about the interdependence and understand the intersection. So where can you give each other the freedom and the space to run with the things that you are responsible for, that you are autonomously responsible for? And where is our energy best spent in coalition around the things that we need each other for? And it's a way of prioritizing, not saying we won't do something, but to talk about the things where we have the most shared value and biting off a strategic and logical approach to making progress, because progress begets progress. It brings other people in. The other thing I will say is we are talking about generational work. And so when you think about boiling the ocean in a year or two, that's really overwhelming. But when you think about making sort of, I like to say, laying the breadcrumbs to that thriving future, then you start to say, it's not that we don't find your initiative valuable. Here are the reasons why we're starting here. And I think the important piece is it's that part of the conversation, which is, were they a part of lifting up the need? Were they given a fair, full airing of why it's important? And were they a part of understanding how the decisions get made and the rationale for what goes first versus staging differently? This is all about building the capacity to sit in dialogue and hear each other and build those mutual shared values that help make pretty clear pretty quickly once you do that what needs to happen first and second and third versus what then other people can run with. And it's okay because it's happening. It can't all become the responsibility of the coalition. You collapse under your own weight.
Great question. And I want to make sure we get a little time for Veronica and Mariah to kind of talk about next steps, but let's get one more question in. And I'm sorry, is it Nanine, Nicolette?
It is Nanine. Thank you. I had a question. Thank you for this presentation. It was absolutely, it speaks to my heart and my mind for sure. It definitely leads with kindness and leans in with curiosity, and that's a big deal for me. So as a human being, not as in my role. But within my role, I heard many times you talk about equity, which is very exciting to me. One of the things that go along with that is diversity and inclusion. And so how is that incorporated into the whole? Because this is an incredibly diverse region. They all are, but and there are definite lines, there are definite pods. And so that diversion and inclusion needs to be a very strong thread along with equity. And does it address that?
So the framework itself within belonging and civic muscle in particular talks about freedom from oppression, opportunities for things that help build diversity, equity, and inclusion. And within each of them, there you'll find definitions of that. At the end of the day, and this is always the frustrating part, which is probably good because I'm at the end of my time, only you and your community can solve for that. There's no framework. People will tell you, they will charge you lots of consulting money to tell you they can solve that problem for you. But our experience is genuinely understanding what inclusion, what diversity needs to look like. Again, I'll keep it in the measurement framework, what your baseline is for who feels like they actually belong, and what it will take to bridge to create the space for them to start to truly belong. And what that inclusion looks like is so unique to your community situation. The framework can help you get there. Again, it can set a table for a conversation along with some of the other frameworks that we talk about. And I know Monty has his own and that he uses. We share a lot of them. But at the end of the day, there's no shortcut to having this conversation about harms that have happened, how we find ourselves where we are, the true diagnosis of the state of our systems, and what it will take to heal. I think that you'll find when you set that table and trust gets built, which doesn't happen in one meeting or two, that community members can come to this space and there's something different here about what is trying to be accomplished, then over time you will see that inclusion happen. But it also requires us to suspend like our needs, our white dominant culture needs for timeline and approach, and that can be really challenging. So much of this is, and we talk a lot about in our own organization, as within, so without. So we do a lot of work on our internal culture and individuals working on their own heart space for this and readying ourselves to do this work. And I think that applies universally in all of our communities.
Yeah.
Thank you for your candor and being just open to that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Nanine. I know last week I was out with the Othering and Belonging Institute, and the whole theme of the conference was how do we belong without othering? And that can take a lot of different forms, given the diversity and different perspectives, and racial and ethnic identities is just part of that, right? In this incredibly polarized political environment. So holding space for different perspectives and really taking into account the legacies of harm and exclusion, which varies, we found this framework to be really helpful. So the fact that West Virginia has adopted this as an organizing principle and many in California, I think speaks to kind of the kind of flexibility around how to support really healthy, productive, healing conversations. And I really appreciate your question, Jesus. Anyway, so much to talk about, and I'm really excited to kind of boomerang this back. And Becky Payne, thank you so much for your leadership and being with us.
Thank you all. Good luck.
Thanks. Veronica and Mariah are going to talk a little bit around how we can start to kind of use some of these ideas to catalyze change in your region.
Sorry, y'all, I was muted. Okay, I want to make sure my slideshow is on presenters mode. Am I good? Okay. Monty, did you want to cover anything on these slides?
No,
Or do you want us to jump into our...
Yeah,
okay.
let's jump into your pieces. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll let Mariah take it away with talking about the well-being survey efforts, and then I'll wrap things up with the simultaneous community dialogue work group and efforts that we're planning for this summer. So Mariah.
Thank you. So our well-being survey that will kick off tomorrow and be open through July 31st is, there's an example right there on the screen, you'll see really tiny, is designed after, so Cantrell's ladder, the question of where do you see yourself on a scale of 0 to 10. So the first 2 questions on the survey get at that with currently, where do you see yourself? And then 5 years from now, where do you see yourself? And then the questions after ask about physical health, mental health, financial well-being, and there's some questions as well that get to that belonging piece. So do you feel like you belong to your community? How often do you feel lonely? And then we ask also some demographic questions. The survey is completely anonymous, but we would like to know the town and the zip code that folks are answering from, so that we can then get down on that level of the areas that are struggling, suffering, and then the areas that are thriving. So that will be available via SurveyMonkey link and a QR code that will go out. We'll make sure that that all gets broadcast to everyone tomorrow. We have an email campaign going out. And then the paper surveys are available. We have this translated into 5 languages. And so we have paper copies available if folks are going out and about to events and it's easier to hand out a paper copy. We will have those here in our office. There's also a toolkit that will be available on our website, and that has all of the materials for both the online, spreading the word with the SurveyMonkey link, and then we have the paper copies available as well. So can you go to the next slide, Veronica? I don't know what we have next. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the dialogues go with the survey.
Yes, I was trying to unmute myself. So yes, community dialogue. So as I mentioned earlier, as we roll out the Wellbeing survey, we're simultaneously working on establishing a work group that will help convene community dialogue across the region. And the goal is to dive deeper into the qualitative part of these efforts, so that, we can start making sense of those factors that are preventing some individuals from thriving, while it enables others to thrive or to suffer and struggle. So the initial work group will not only help us convene our specific well-being dialogues across the region, but this is also a way for partners and organizations to build capacity for their own efforts. So if you are interested in being a part of this initial work group, getting trained up for hosting community dialogue, let me know, reach out to me. And I believe we're planning for two planning meetings and then a half day of training. So if you're interested or would like to participate in these efforts, please reach out to me, let me know, and we will also follow up with the specific group via email with all of those links and details. So that is, I think, it for dialogues. Just a quick recap of kind of our work plan for the rest of the year. I can't believe we're already in May. So we'll continue the Wellbeing survey. It'll be open through the summer. We'll be training up folks for the community dialogue piece of things, and then aiming for a fall summit where we can hopefully have an initial or some type of preliminary analysis on the data, and plan for a really fun Wellbeing summit where we'll look into the data and then also build some more momentum around this North Star and this regional network that has been in the works for a while. So Maria, do you just want to tag team this?
Sure. So as I mentioned, all of the toolkit and everything will be available tomorrow. I'm dropping the link in the chat. It'll be on the data and report section of our website, and that's where you can find where to share out. Morgan, our communications manager, has created social media posts, really everything that you need to share this survey out. And then if partners are, and I saw that some of our partners that have joined this have already reached out to me about some of the outreach events they are going to. And thank you so much for being willing to spread the word. We do have swag available in our office. If you would like to pick up some items, we can also bring them to you. And I also wanted to mention, if anyone that is doing community outreach does need some financial assistance to help getting the word out and going to some of these outreach opportunities, please reach out to me as well, and we can work together on that. So just anywhere and everywhere that we can get. And yeah, as John mentioned, if you know of folks that are maybe we haven't connected with already, we would love to connect with everyone so that we can get into those areas of our 4-county region that maybe we don't always survey and reach. So, and yeah, that's the toolkit. We'll have, as I mentioned, the social media post. There will be posters with QR codes that you can put up around your office. And also, if you're going to an event, we will have some available that we already will be putting into holders so that you can have that ready to go at your booth. And then that will also include the paper surveys available, and we can print those for you. It does look, the survey is meant to only take about 5 minutes. It looks longer than it is because of the formatting, and so it is a stapled 3-page survey, but it really is, a lot of the check the box, and there are only 2 questions that are open-ended. So we don't want folks to get, scared away from the survey. It does look longer than it is. So really, though, we're hoping that it doesn't take longer than 5 minutes for folks to complete. And then we have those email templates.
And I think that wraps up the kickoff webinar. Again, if you're interested in joining the network, I will share the network webpage in a follow-up email. And if you're interested in being a part of the community dialogue work group throughout the summer, get trained, or know of any partners out there that would be really good community dialogue hosts, let me know so that we can start planning for that capacity building piece of things. And that pretty much wraps it up. So I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody again. And we have couple minutes to spare. So is there any questions relative to the survey, relative to outreach, the community dialogues, or the framework from partners?
Jennifer, yes, we can make the slides available after this. We will also have this, we have a recording for today's, so we can share that out as well.
Looks like Emilio may have a question there.
I'm assuming that the survey is in several languages?
Yes, it is translated into Spanish, Russian, Ukrainian, and Vietnamese. So we have paper surveys for each of those languages available. And then on SurveyMonkey, there is a drop-down option in the upper right-hand corner that allows for folks to choose the language that they would like to complete the survey in.
Is there ASL accessibility to the survey?
Unfortunately, not at this time, but that is wonderful feedback for future. I'm going to write that down and maybe looking into that as the survey is continuing. Thank you, Emilio.
Monty, Stacy, John, any last words from you 3?
We have a question in the chat about the literacy level of the survey. And I know, Monty, you assisted with the task force with kind of designing the survey, and it was modeled after other surveys that have been completed in other areas. So
yeah, real quickly, it's a great question, and there's some more information on that, but these were absolutely designed with really being accessible, been used, some of these questions millions of times over in different cultures. But again, trying to figure out how to best make these work in your region as a catalyst, I think, is the critical part. And, these could you know, I would encourage you not to see this just as another survey or another dialogue. You all have incredible opportunities and a lot of capacity in that community to say, how do we really start to see this as a movement building opportunity and see what starts to emerge here? And I think you all are in really great hands with the leadership here to kind of really, as John said, take the first step and kind of deeper kind of collective action across the region.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize too is as we kick this off, you know, tomorrow, we're still here to listen to as many ways we can really get out and collect the voice of our community. So even as Becky said, you know, even as we are out there surveying and collecting information, sometimes we have to think differently. So if you guys see ways that you think we need to better engage different community members, different populations across North Central Washington, we have 3 months to collect this information. It doesn't mean that we can't always pivot or make some changes in the process to make sure that we really want a diversity of feedback on this survey. And so we see everyone on this call and everyone we partner with as key members in helping us get this all out and helping us understand how we continue to tailor this over the next 3 months to make sure we're hitting everyone. So this isn't the start and end of kicking it out, but really a 3-month process to see how we can really get out there in community and collect really that information from the members themselves.
So this is Nancy, and I would like to say that in our in speaking with Veronica, I think it's important too that maybe that teenagers can also be a part of this survey as well. And I think that's an important group within our community to be part of this process. Right?
Yes, thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy.
Any other questions? Always happy to answer any questions via email as well as we get kicked off. I know some questions will arise as we're officially launched.
All right, I think with that, are we finished with the webinar? And again, just thank you all for your time today. Again, reach out to Mariah, Veronica, or myself if you have any additional follow-up questions. And my understanding is more information will be also sent out to webinar participants, so you can also follow up to that email.
Thank you all for joining.